Alright guys, the topic for today is my experiences with the TTS MasterTune tuner. Unless you own one, you're planning to buy one, you just inherited one, or you just like dull tech talk, this vlog is probably not going to be that interesting for you. So if you want to bail out, go for it. Hey, you're still here? Alright, here we go. So, I bought my bike used a little over a month ago. It had some decel popping, and it was annoying enough that I felt it needed to be tuned out. I also wanted to put a Screamin' Eagle high flow air intake on it to finish the stage 1. So, I knew I needed a tuner. What I discovered shortly thereafter is the bike was actually tuned with a TTS MasterTune, and I was able to acquire that device from the previous owner, saving me having to shell out a big wad of money. So I got the tuner and went to work. It's daunting. It is the most complex tuner on the market, I believe. TTS has a long history. I believe they're the ones who made the first tunes for Harley when they switched over to BCMs and fuel injection and all that, I think. Something like that. And so they know what they're doing. And this tuner is very capable. You can tune just about anything with it. Any change you make to the bike, man, they can handle it. But if you're like me and you're not planning to make all kinds of radical changes, it might be overkill. I personally would have been happy with a Power Vision. If I were doing it over and I didn't have a tuner, the Power Vision would be what I spend my money on. But in this case, it pretty much fell into my lap. You know, I inherited the MasterTune, so I had to make the best of it. And so, what did I come up with? Well, first of all, it's got a 70-page manual, and the current manual isn't completely up to date for the current version of their software, which is a little annoying. So, I believe it's some things at the end, like frequently asked section, and the discussion on deceleration popping. That's not really up to date, and there's a couple other spots where clarification is needed. However, there is a guide called TTS for Dummies that some knowledgeable individual put together, and you can find that on the web by Googling. That guide is really good. However, it also is not up to date for the current version of the software. But between the guide and the manual, you can pretty much figure out what you need to do. There's also more information in the help screens that isn't always in the manual. So I definitely have a gripe against TTS for not keeping their documentation up to date. And that's really important when you're making something as complicated as their tuner. There are like 20 different tables in there and all kinds of parameters and things that you can set and control. I'm not even going to begin to go into them. But here's kind of an overview of how the process works, at least for me doing a stage 1, which is just exhaust and air intake. So the software, when you download it and install the updates and everything, it comes with hundreds of tunes from TTS. But when you put in your year, make, and model, you might end up with only like 3 for your bike, and that was true in my case. And none of those 3 really were a good fit. It wasn't like I could just grab one and say, okay, I'm going to use this one and I'm done. I grabbed one that was basically a heavy breather air intake was the only mod. They didn't have one that was just a stage 1 intake plus exhaust. Actually, they did, but when I tried it, the bike ran horribly. So anyway, you get one that's kind of minimal change and work up, if that makes sense. So I grabbed the one for the air intake. The next thing you want to do is you want to use their flight recorder software. Now, what you need to do is put the tuner in a mode and enable flight recorder to record while you ride. So when I say in a mode, there's some tables that they want you to reset to some different values. One of them I believe is RPM, one of them is what's called the main lambda table, and I think there's one other thing they want you to tweak. After you do that, you enable flight recorder, you take the dongle off your computer, you attach it to your bike, and you go ride. Now, I did 4 flight recorder runs. Each run was an hour to an hour and a half ride. And on these rides, you want to try and ride in a way that you encounter all the different kinds of riding conditions that you're going to do in normal life for like the rest of your life with this bike. So for me, that was some highway like I'm doing now. It was some country roads. It was some parking lot. I mean, everything. You want to ride like a granny. You want to ride like you stole it, as they say. High RPMs, low RPMs, just everything you can think of. Uphills, downhills, whatever. After your first flight recorder run, you're going to plug the dongle into your computer. You can leave it on the bike. You don't have to disconnect it from the bike. And you're going to download the flight recorder files, and they're going to get converted. They have like 4 or 5 different pieces of software. Data Master, VTune, Flight Recorder, I forget what they're all called. But you download your log files, and what you do is you take your baseline tune, which is the one you started with, TTS, and you merge them together with the flight recorder files. And when you merge them together, you're in essence making a new tune. And when you merge them together in the software, I forget exactly what piece it is, but I'll put it on the screen here. You can see what RPMs it recorded data for and for what manifold pressure. So it's like a matrix, and you'll see where it recorded data, where it didn't record data, and where it needs more data. And that gives you an idea visually of like what you did. So now what you do is you take these logs, you merge everything together, you make a new tune, you save it, you flash that back to the bike. So now you're riding with like version 2 of your tune. And you do another flight recorder session. And you go through the whole process. Again, now when you merge those log files in, you should start to see that some of the cells didn't change that much, if at all. That's good. That means it has kind of nailed down those cells based on RPM or whatever. But you'll see other cells where it did change. And so as you keep doing this process, making a new tune, flashing it back to the bike, you should start to notice that the amount of change is getting smaller and smaller. Now, I don't know how many times or for how long you really need to do the flight recorder run. I did 4 of them, as I said, and the software kept telling me more tuning was required. But I was looking at the matrix of information, and I was like, look, this bike is already tuned way better than it was when I had it. And I just reached the point where I didn't feel any more tuning was necessary. So let me just take a detour for a second and say one of the main things that's being tuned when you're doing this is the tables called the VE tables. That's the volumetric efficiency tables. And I'm not going to explain what volumetric efficiency is, like dictionary definition, but it has to do with how efficient the engine is, and it's adjusting the air that is required in the cylinder for efficient combustion. I think that's pretty accurate. So you're looking at the VE tables after your flight recorder runs, and you're seeing that it's getting more and more accurate, and less change is being recorded. As you do this and you start honing in on things, one of the options you have is to start recording EGR data and adjusting that as well. And I did that on my third run. And what I noticed after that was there were some significant changes to EGR. But then when I did my fourth flight recorder run, the EGR changes were pretty minimal. So I had reached a point after 4 runs, which was probably about 5 to 6 hours of riding, where I felt I did enough tuning to satisfy what was needed. So I made my final tune, and just a word on that. When you decide you're done doing the flight recorder runs and you want to save your final tune, you have to go back in and reset some of the parameters that they had you change in the beginning, like the RPMs and the main lambda table, and I think one other thing. So I did that, and now I'm going to pause here for a moment, take another detour, and talk about the main lambda table. Apparently in earlier versions of the software, they used what they call the fuel ratio table, or the air fuel ratio table, AFR. And that seems to have become like an obsolete thing, and now they use this main lambda table. I can't really describe the difference, but the main lambda table is important, at least for me, because this is where you can make some changes to control popping in the exhaust on deceleration. Now, I knew from messing around with this before I started my flight recorder runs that by adjusting the first column in that table to, which is the zero manifold pressure table column, adjusting that down 5% would help eliminate popping. So I did that, and then I felt I had done enough. I saved my tune as the final version of my tune, and I flashed it to my bike. So today is my first ride in earnest with my new tune. I did 60 miles this morning to work. It popped like once. 2/3 of the way home now. It may have popped once. If it did, it wasn't big. What I've learned about popping is a lot. Some say you always have decel pop, you just don't always hear it with stock exhausts because, number one, they're quieter, and number two, they're more restrictive when it comes to airflow, so there's not as much opportunity for popping. Basically what the popping is there's unburnt fuel in the exhaust. When you let off the accelerator, air from outside can come in and it ignites. I think that's pretty much the explanation. What is a little weird is you would think the answer to that is to reduce the amount of fuel in the exhaust, but for some odd reason they actually have you increase the fuel when you let off the throttle. So just not something I can thoroughly explain, but for some reason that is the way they tune this popping out. The other thing that I read, and I read a lot of different sources of information on this, is that popping may never completely go away. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just what you're prepared to tolerate. I personally don't really like it. My previous bike never popped. Even when it didn't have a tuner and the engine was running bad, it still didn't pop. But this bike does. And so for the tiny amount of time or occurrences that it pops, I'm pretty happy with the whole tuning process. And I don't feel any need to keep tweaking it to have it not pop at all. It's just not that big a deal for me. However, I'll say this, because of the complexity of this MasterTune device, I'm pretty certain somebody that really knows what they're doing with this thing could probably tune those pops out and it would never pop. But I just don't have that much time or interest. It's just not that big a deal for me. So at this stage of the game, I have my new Screaming Eagle air intake, I have a set of Vance & Hines Big Shot pipes, and I have my bike tuned. It rides great. I love the performance. I'm getting 42 miles per gallon consistently, which is what I got from day one with it. And aside from an occasional small pop sound on deceleration or on very aggressive acceleration when shifting gears, it's pretty much not an issue. So that was my experience. The TTS MasterTune, as I said, is very complex. Pre-prepared to do a lot of reading, rereading. I called TTS about 3 or 4 times with some questions that just were not clear or answered correctly in the manual or mentioned at all. They were helpful, which I appreciated. And, you know, after reading and all that, it finally started to make sense. And I think the end result today from my ride is that I did a pretty good job. All I really want is a nice riding bike, good fuel efficiency, and I don't want to have any problems with it running too lean or anything like that. So I'm pretty sure I can say mission accomplished. If I were starting over with a bike that had no tuner at all, and I were going to need one, I would still go with a Power Vision. That was what I really wanted. The Power Vision may not be quite as powerful and flexible as a MasterTune, but I think it's a heck of a lot easier based on all the feedback I've gotten from other people who use it. The other thing is, stage 1 is it for me. I'm not doing cams, I'm not doing any other changes to this bike that would require a more powerful or complex tuner. So again, I think the MasterTune is an overkill for me personally and for what I do and have done. So that is my experience. I wish you well if you are planning to go this route, or if you inherited one and you're like, oh my god, what do I do with this thing? Don't panic. Actually, I'd be happy to pass on some of the things I learned if you are interested. So just leave a comment on my video. I'll see the notification and I'll answer. Alright guys, that's it, man. What a fabulous day today. It's only about 65, 70, if that. It's nice and cool. It feels really good. The clouds look kind of scary today, but not a drop, which I'm very happy about. And I should be home in about 20 minutes. So thanks for watching. I hope everyone's well. Till next time.